What's going on, guys? Gas Station here, giving you a sort of extended thoughts, afterthoughts of Shadows of Valentia. And something, I wanted to get this off my chest here because there's definitely a lot of hype surrounding this game and an amazing amount of anticipation. Me, probably, confidently, probably one of the most excited people for this game. But that being said, I think there are things that people have to understand about Gaiden and Shadows of Valentia and what exactly this game is going to end up doing. Pretty much this video is addressing hype. Because personally, I'm super excited for this game because it's a remake of my favorite game in Gaiden. But that being said, there's specific reasons why I loved Gaiden so much, and it's because of those reasons that I think if people's expectations of this game are too high, they're going to end up being quite disappointed with Shadows of Valentia. Now, the things that I loved about the original Gaiden was that it was extremely experimental. It did things that no Fire Emblem game has ever tried again. And, you know, part of my love for that game is part of my love for just ambition and experimentation in Fire Emblem. I'm always a fan of new ideas and them trying to push the envelope. And there was a lot of things that Gaiden did that if you're sort of set in your ways with Fire Emblem, it will be hard to adjust to these new things because it's really different from normal Fire Emblem. And that's something that concerns me, is that at the time these were like very interesting, ahead of its time ideas that were sort of a mix between like Final Fantasy and it had dungeon crawling aspects in it as well. And that's what was really cool about it. But what concerns me is that will these mechanics hold up in 2017? Because not only are they so much different from you know, Awakening and Fates, it's just when I picture like, will people like these things that a game from 1992 did? Will people still assume that these mechanics are dated when they're coming? Like, what are you guys expecting from people who never played Gaiden and who are excited to play Gaiden? There's what I've seen from a lot of reaction videos I've watched and a lot of comments and a lot of things that are going around is they're extremely excited for this game. But I feel like if you don't know what you're getting yourself into and your expectations are very high, there's a risk that you might end up being disappointed with the game. And I think, and that's a natural thing, but it's also very concerning because there's, as people have started to like gather, Echoes is sort of like a sub series, like Fire Emblem Echoes. Echoes implying kind of sort of like this kind of like a call to the past type of thing. Like an echo is sort of like a repeat of what just happened, but at a distance. So this distance would be like a space between time. So Echoes, a lot of people are assuming, is, you know, a sub series where they're bringing back old games. And that puts a lot of pressure on Shadows of Valentia, because if this game doesn't do well, and if it doesn't sell well, then it might set a precedent that Nintendo sees, and they're like, oh, well, I mean, I guess classics aren't the way to go, and we should keep adapting, and we should keep making new games. And that's concerning, and while I think going with Gaiden is one of the better options they could have went with, I know there's a lot of people who said they would have liked to see Genealogy of the Holy War get remade, but I think that's a title that's extremely ambitious, and I would even argue that is overly ambitious to try out doing a remake right now. For many reasons. One, because there's a lot of mature tones. There's incest. There's a fuck ton of incest. There's some crazy shit that goes on in Genealogy. And yes, while children while children are a thing, remaking that entire game, like Fire Emblem 4 is a long game. And if you thought like Gaiden was different, like Fire Emblem 4 has outrageously long maps, very long campaigns, very long chapters, I mean. And to see that get translated into sort of, seeing that getting remade into a game on the 3DS, to me seems like a very, very, very ambitious and different route that 3DS has ever done. Obviously, and I think it's even more different than Gaiden. Like, we say Gaiden's very Dark Horse and very unique and different, which it is, but the maps were of you know, workable size. When we're talking Fire Emblem Genealogy, we're talking about massive, massive maps. Like, a lot of risk goes into putting in more time to develop that game. There's a lot more dialogue, there's a lot more characters, there's a lot more interactions, there's a lot more features, you know, there's a lot more shit. There's a weapon triangle in that. Like, there's a lot more stuff going into a genealogy remake rather than a Gaiden remake. So I think going with Gaiden is a healthy choice, because I think the translation effort, and I think just the porting, for lack of a better term, like the remaking from the ground up, I should say. It's not even a port at all. It's a remake. I think it's less risky because it's a less resource intensive activity. There's less characters, there's less dialogue, there's less everything. That being said, they're making an anime. They're incorporating an anime into Gaiden, which is really sick. But I'm just saying, I think using Gaiden as a template is a good way to test the waters here. And personally, I think if they're doing another Echoes Fire Emblem, they're going to make Binding Blade, because they seem to be very much pushing Binding Blade for, like, I guess to please the Japanese crowd, because Westerners haven't played Binding Blade, even though there's an accessible translation. But, like, even in, like, the mobile, like FE mobile, like Heroes, there was a lot of new artwork for FE6 characters, but not a lot of artwork for FE4, even if at all FE4 or FE5. Like, there was just almost none of that. Even Path of Radiance didn't really get any love. It's mostly just the GBA games and the 3DS games, like pretty much all Western releases except for consoles, which is strange. But I digress. So let me preface this by saying I think going with Gaiden is a good idea, but I can't help, despite all my excitement, my clear overjoy, my clear extreme excitement, that I have to address the hype surrounding this game. You have to understand that Gaiden is, in some ways, a step back from Fates now. Even though Gaiden was a thing for its time, Gaiden, when it was released and when it was played, was very polarizing. People often had it on their bottom lists of Fire Emblem games because there was a lot of archaic things and there was a lot of annoying things that Gaiden did that set people off. It was for a very clunky and slow system. It had really great ideas, but the execution wasn't there. And I can attest to this because there was a lot of moments in my Fire Emblem Gaiden playthrough where I was so annoyed, so frustrated with the game that despite my love for it, I do not think Gaiden is the best game. It's definitely my favorite, but I don't think it's the best game in the franchise. Not really. I love the game so much. I love it. I love Gaiden, but there's issues with it. I'm hopeful that the things they will fix are things that need to be fixed. If you've seen in the trailers, the things that I don't mind staying, there's if you take 0 damage, you're actually taking 1 damage, which we saw in the trailers. There doesn't really seem to be a weapon triangle in this game, which there wasn't in Gaiden or FE1 or FE3, I'm pretty sure. It happened in FE4, but there's no weapon triangle, and I don't know if they're actually going to keep that incorporated or not. There's a lack of weapon triangle. There's no such thing as taking 0 damage in Gaiden. If you deal 0 damage, then you take 1 damage. There's other things that I think are very, very close to detail that I really appreciate, like the UI, like the user interface. When you're like in the battle forecast, there's attack, defense. There's There's HP, attack, crit. No, there's hit chance, attack, defense, and crit, or something like that. And the way these games work, which is the first time it's happened again since since the Western releases, was the forecast. You actually have to calculate the forecast. Now, I'm obviously not sure if they're gonna add on to this feature where you can actually see the damage that you'll be taking, but in the Japanese only games, you had to do like these calculations. It was really simple calculations. It was just like, what's their attack, what's your defense, subtract their attack with your defense and see how much damage you take. And now, since there's no weapon triangle, it's just pure damage. There's no modifying. I don't know if they're gonna have a way to just automatically calculate the damage you do. I think it's a really good thing that they added it. See, I'm not really sure how faithful they're gonna be to Gaiden. On one hand, I really love how they're putting so much attention to detail into the battle forecast, but at the same time, what concerns me is a lot of those things are going to be very new to new players who might not like where they're going with it. Yes, the paint job is godlike. Yes, the animation looks amazing. Yes, this game looks much more pretty than Fates. But mechanically, it's very classic. It's very classic. And what concerns me is that there's not going to be like some sort of way that newer players can get their old interface or get the new the Western interface that they're used to, the Western forecast that they're used to when they're seeing how much damage can do what. There's other very Gaiden things that we haven't seen ever since. Magic, when you cast magic, it takes away some of your HP. That might seem very jarring to some people because mages are naturally kind of soft, and now there's this other aspect where the magic you cast takes a little bit of HP from you. That being said, there's a lot of ways to get there's a lot of health regen items which sort of offsets that. But again, it's one of those things. Are new players going to enjoy these mechanics? I know I'm going to love them because I loved Gaiden. I love them in Gaiden. And I can't help but think they're going to refine a lot of things that Gaiden messed up on. That is my optimism, is that they're going to look at Gaiden. They're going to look at what held Gaiden back from being much better than it was. One of them was being on a clunky system that was extremely slow. There was no real limits on shamans, who were just the most annoying enemies ever. There was a lot of cryptic things that you had to look up on. You had to look up on guides. Like you had to go offline. Sorry, not offline, but like you had to go on your computer and look up strategies to deal with certain places in the game, because a lot of it was just, here's the game, figure out for yourself. I don't know how much they're gonna help the player, which is something that's going to be concerning, because Gaiden was a very hard game to play. Not because of the interface, but because of the actual challenge that Gaiden was. It was a difficult game to beat. It was much harder than other games in the franchise. And part of that reasoning was because they didn't really leave anything up to they left everything to the player to figure out. And in this kind of Age of Fire Emblem, I'm not really sure how newer players are going to react to that. So on one hand, I'm really enjoying that they're going to bring back so much stuff, but at the same time, I'm worried that they're going to sort of focus so much on on veteran fans who've played Gaiden and who've played the Western released, or the non-localized games, who are used to calculating attack and defense. Just used to playing much more difficult games, because Fire Emblem 4 is a very easy game, and Fire Emblem 5 I heard is very difficult. And then there's the Western released games, which 6 wasn't released, but Roy Hard Mode, Binding Blade Hard Mode was quite difficult, but most of the other games were quite easy until I don't even think Radiant Dawn was that hard, really. I mean, I didn't play Radiant Dawn Hard Mode, but even playing normal, I wasn't really having trouble with it. But point being is that I'm just concerned that the expectations for Gaiden is going to be extremely high. And they might, and the likelihood that they're going to be disappointed with what they get is something that I'm just nervous about. I want this game to do so well, because the implications of the success of this game can have great effects for the future of the Echoes subseries, if it actually is a subseries. There's other things that I saw in the community that they were very excited about, that I feel like I have to address here, because I'm concerned about people being extremely disappointed when they think things are going to happen in Shadows of Valentia when they might actually not be the case. There's not really a confirmation whether there are supports in this game, and that's sort of that's a lot of the linearity of Gaiden was that there wasn't supports, there was canon pairings, and then there was just this is the campaign, you do what you got to do to get the campaign. You can grind on monsters and stuff and get experience. The dungeons in Gaiden aren't that deep. The visiting the villages aspect, villages in Gaiden weren't big. They were a house or two, or a very small space. And what concerns me is that people are expecting Pokemon fucking sized villages with a lot of loot. But the thing is with Gaiden, that there wasn't a lot of loot. There wasn't a lot of items that you could pick up in Gaiden. There was steel weapons, but there's no gold in Gaiden. You don't buy weapons. There's no armory. You pick up items from chests that are sort of in a linear sort of thing. You get items from Yeah, you get items from chests, but the dungeons, like where they are, is that they're not like complex, like dungeon, like labyrinth things. What I think people might be being misled on is like the actual dungeon crawling aspect of Gaiden, which is something I'm skeptical of. It's not, because like in normal Gaiden, it wasn't very deep. The dungeon crawling was only quite significant in like maybe 3 or 4 areas, if I remember correctly. The rest of it was overworld stuff and just fighting enemies, like going across the map and just meeting up with monsters. Right now in this game, there's this sort of impression that there's going to be this very deep dungeon crawling aspect with, you know, actually walking in these caves and engaging with enemies. I'm just not sure how deep they're going to get into it, and I'm not really expecting anything, and that's my thing. Like, my expectations are honestly a bit low, because I know what Gaiden did, and I'm just very excited to see all my favorite characters and all these aspects get reimagined. That's what I'm looking forward to, but my expectations are at a reasonable thing because I know what to expect. I feel like a lot of people don't. I feel like people might be expecting too much from this game, which is concerning to me. There's the dungeon crawling aspect, which honestly in the original Gaiden was a thing, but it wasn't really like a huge focus. I think Manx touched up on this in his own video. Like, the dungeon crawling aspect wasn't this huge like Legend of Zelda Final Fantasy thing. It was like quite small, quite reserved, still had, you know, chests here and there that you had to explore. There was exploration in Gaiden for sure, in these dungeons, but that being said, like, they were quite short for being dungeons. And some of the dungeons were kind of obnoxious. And there was, like, even the dungeon aspect were flawed. Like, Gaiden is a far from perfect game, for sure. There's a lot of flaws with it, and I'm hoping that the remaster will address those things. Another concern I have is people's impressions that, oh my god, finally a classic Fire Emblem game with a story that's amazing. It's very straightforward, it's by no means awful, but it's just like, it's not like some fucking masterpiece. Like, it's not a huge masterpiece. It's a story from 1992, guys. Like, keep your expectations where they should be. Like, it was a story from 1992 in a Fire Emblem game, which is a franchise that even to this day isn't really popular for the actual depth of the plot. And we're talking about Gaiden, which had a lot less dialogue, so it's going to be quite simplistic. I'm expecting it to be quite simplistic. I'm assuming the dialogue is going to get a little bit more in depth, but that being said, there wasn't really indication of supports being implemented into the game. I don't know if they're going to be. Like, there's no, like, all of the dialogue interactions were between, like, one kind of character screen thing, which is very identical to what Gaiden did. Like, in the very beginning of Gaiden, Mycen is speaking to you, and I'm assuming that's how they're going to do the same thing if they're really going to stay faithful to the game. If they do stay very faithful to the original game, then just don't expect to be wowed by an amazing story, is what I'm saying. Like, the story, as much as I like it, I think the story is nice, but there's aspects with the story that I disagree with, and there's some points in the story that kind of leave you scratching your head, kind of in like, what is happening here? So in terms of like people's expectations for this fucking amazing plot from Gaiden and shit, like, just, if you're thinking that it's going to be a fucking breaking, like, mind-blowing thing, it's not going to be. I don't think it's going to be. And I'm not really mad about it, because I know what to expect, and I still love the game because I just still love Gaiden. And the story is one thing. It's not perfect, and it's not like a super amazing story. It's very grounded, very tight-knit, which is something that's very good. It's very reserved, and it's very straightforward, and it has progression with Alm and Celica, who are like the power couple of this campaign. But I'm not going to get into any story spoilers, but just saying it might not be what you expect it to be. And there's just a lot of different things that make me really concerned. Like, I'm concerned about the success of this game out of my sheer love for the game itself. Trading in Gaiden was done by, you had your two parties in Celica and Alm, and you traded items between a limited number of opportunities to trade. Like, in the game where you start trading after a story event, there's a hut, there's a few places, there's a few villages or a few like houses where there's these trading units, and these traders, you give your items to these traders, they leave, and then they deliver it to your other party. So there's no like trade interfaces, and that kind of complements the game having not a lot of items in itself. Like, there's no vulneraries, there's no real like aspect of trade menus. It was a very, like, trading wasn't a thing in Fire Emblem until maybe Fire Emblem 5, if I remember correctly. Like, trading wasn't a big deal. Like, rescuing isn't in the game. Skills aren't really in this game. There's different quirks that some classes have, but you know, it's just a very classic remake. So what concerns me is that newer players might just be put off by the fact that it's so much different than other games, and I'm only concerned about that because I want this game to do very well, because it means a lot if this game does well. It means more than just successful sales. It means potential for an FE4 remake or an FE6 remake or an FE5, like that kind of shit. And that's pretty much all my concerns. Like, this ramble was mostly about how optimistic I am that they're going to fix the issues that Gaiden had, and if they fix those issues, personally, I will honestly think this might be my favorite game. Like, if it does nothing but fix the issues that I had with the original Gaiden, Shadows of Valentia is my favorite Fire Emblem game in the franchise, hands down. Like, Gaiden, despite its flaws, is my favorite game for the things it did, for the things it tried, for the risks it took, and for this like very interesting environment and aspect it had. But it was appreciated out of an understanding of where Fire Emblem was at the time, how they designed their maps at the time, how they did how they did things. Like, despite some of the maps being kind of fucking stupid, despite some of the map design being very extremely archaic and very, like, you know, not good at times, it still had that charm of, like, this NES charm. Will this NES charm translate into a 3DS game if they maintain that map design aspect? I'm not sure. But even so, I won't really mind it because it's going to look amazing on the 3DS anyway, which is what I'm getting at. That being said, too, remakes for Fire Emblem that Intelligent Systems has undergone haven't really had a strong track record of being successes. Shadow Dragon, for a lot of people in the community who've never played FE1, were kind of disappointed after playing, FE7, FE8, FE9, FE10, all these very bright, colorful, like, dynamic games with interesting mechanics and even supports. And, FE11 comes around and it takes all of those things and pretty much forget, it's literally a graphic overhaul, is pretty much what Shadow Dragon was, with a few twists here and there. But it more or less was a graphic overhaul. And that's what's concerning to me, because you build up this excitement for the franchise. If you're from FE7 and you've played every game up to FE10, then you play FE11 and it kind of sets you way back into, like, very classic Fire Emblem, which a lot of people enjoyed because they liked FE1. But at the same time, a lot of people who have gotten used to, dynamic and interesting mechanics and graphics, to Shadow Dragon were turned off, and that's one of the contributing factors as to why Shadow Dragon wasn't really well received in the West. While that being said, it was quite well received in Japan and whatnot. Then comes FE12, which didn't even get localized because they were concerned that the same thing would happen again. And that's what's concerning to me, is that we've had FE11, and then we had Awakening, which introduced dual striking, and they reinvented children supports and children, and then we had Fates who had enhanced dual striking, who had an addition to the weapon triangle, and two full games of such evolution, for lack of a better term, back to Gaiden, which doesn't seem to have dual striking or doesn't seem to have supports, is something that concerns me, because will these old mechanics be enjoyed by newer players? We've seen the same an identical situation happen with FE10 and FE11, and what concerns me is that FE14 and Shadows of Valentia is going to be a similar case. Now, that being said, Shadow Dragon in itself was extremely classic for being the first one and very simplistic, while Gaiden itself is quite different. It's extremely different. It has a bunch of new mechanics that even Awakening and Fates players haven't seen yet. So on one hand, I'm concerned about the simplicity of what Gaiden was, being transformed into a 3DS title. My concern, it's sort of lightened up by the fact that Gaiden itself was very revolutionary for its time. But it's still a concern. is Shadows of Valentia gonna do well in this sort of era of Fire Emblem? And as much as I want it to do well, there's this fear of mine that it will be not well received because it is what it is. It is Gaiden, bro. Like, it is Gaiden. That's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I was dwelling on this for a while, and it's like, this is purely out of my passion for fucking, like, I just can't express my love for this game enough. And this video is literally out of concern for the success of this game, because Gaiden is so Gaiden, right? It's just itself. And there's a lot of concerns with, it's sort of a double-edged sword in that regard. If they stay extremely faithful, like they did with Shadow Dragon, will it be a success? Are they purposely setting up Gaiden to be extremely polarizing? Or sorry, I keep calling it FE15. I'm just gonna call it FE15. 15th Revelations or whatever. Like, are they like some crazy conspiracy theory? Are they setting up this game to be so identical to Gaiden that they're going to try to justify a repeat of Shadow Dragon and then stop focusing on remaking classics and then focus on things like Switch titles? That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what concerns me. Like, that's the kind of shit that makes me wary. Another aspect is that the 3DS, despite its amazing success, maybe might be its last year or so of games being produced. I don't really know, but I know the 3DS was an amazing console. It sold phenomenally, but could you make a case that this is sort of towards the end of its lifespan because the Switch is being introduced, and Nintendo might think it's redundant to have 3DS support while having Switch support, which is a portable game in itself, even though it's a 3-hour portable thing. I don't know how you can really defend the portability of the Switch if the battery power is so much less than a 3DS. And the portability is literally just, you just have to plug it in fucking everywhere type thing. Whereas in the 3DS, you can sort of play it on the train for 6 hours. And I don't know if you can do that with a fucking Switch. But Shadow Dragon and the DS was sort of on its last legs too. And even Radiant Dawn, they didn't sell well for a few reasons. Like, I'm fairly certain Radiant Dawn was one of the last games on the Wii. Shadow Dragon was one of the last games, and it was not really well publicized, which led to the demise of that sort of era of Fire Emblem, which led to the reinvention and Awakening. Like, when people say, Awakening saved the franchise, yes, but Intelligent Systems and Nintendo themselves really fucked themselves over in a lot of ways. They didn't really advertise anything well. They released games at times where it wasn't really the right time to release Fire Emblem games. Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn didn't sell great. And I think one of the contributing factors of that was that, Fire Emblem isn't really designed to be played on a console. Like, it's very easy to move around with Fire Emblem. Like, it's not a game that is so grandiose and so, heavy on, processing power that it needs to be a sit-down game. It doesn't need to be a sit-down game. That's why it's so great when it's on a portable, because it's a game that you can pick up immediately, start playing, put it down really quickly. Whereas console games, there's a sort of understanding that you want to sit down and embrace everything that's going on, and you really want to get invested in it. Whereas Fire Emblem is quite different. Like, you read a lot of dialogue in Fire Emblem, and you just play a lot on the go, and you can just flip it on and off, and you can just continue on a map, and the maps are sort of long and shit like that. I'm kind of going on a ramble now, but point being, what concerns me about Shadows of Valentia is whether or not the faithfulness of Gaiden is going to be a double-edged sword to the point where it will be a turnoff once people start playing it, if it's going to be a pure remake or an actual remaster. Because FE12 is one of people's favorite games. Like, FE12, despite being unreleased to the Western audience, is a very popular game in the franchise for a lot of people. And if Shadows of Valentia does the same thing, then I have full faith and it's going to do great. But coming as someone who understands the charm of Gaiden and what made Gaiden great at the time, to see it be retranslated in 2017, it's just a concern. It's just a concern. I think if people are so excited, and I love the excitement for Gaiden, but I'm just nervous that when people start playing the game in May, they're going to be like, oh, this is Gaiden? Like, seriously? Like, flat maps, no trading, no weapon triangle, magic that takes away HP, you know, not a lot of item distribution. And some of the items in Gaiden were fucking insanity. Like, the rings, like, there was these items, like, accessories called rings that you can equip. And these rings were, like, the most insane things ever. Like, rings maxed out your luck. They gave you a +5 in whatever you had. They were just, the rings were the most broken items in that game because growths weren't that high in Gaiden, so you relied on these ring items to just completely, you know, buff the shit out of your character. Like, I remember the angel ring would give you health regen per turn, and it would also give you like max luck, I'm pretty sure. And it would do some other shit, like, and there was like specific, there's like, I think there was an attack ring, a defense ring, if I remember correctly. Like, there's shields in this game, if I'm pretty sure, and there's like angel swords and angel weapons which did extreme damage to monsters. There's a lot of things that people are going to be very surprised and very caught off guard with, and whether they're going to like it or not is something that concerns me, and I just hope that it sells really well, it's extremely well received. Or it's just well received in general, because then it shows Nintendo that, hey, you know, new fans can appreciate where you're going with this. Make a genealogy remake type thing. So addressing the hype, I'm super excited for this game, and I think everyone is rightfully excited. But that said, just if you think this is going to be the god game of forever and it's going to be like the return of like this great shit, let's just keep in mind, let's just have cautious optimism here that Shadow Dragon was a remake of FE1 and people were quite disappointed with that. I'm not saying it's going to be the same as FE1 and FE11, but it's a similar vein, and Fire Emblem hasn't really had a strong track record of remaking games. Especially for the West, since the only remake we've ever had was FE11, which a lot of people didn't really like that much. But that said, guys, like, I appreciate you guys listening to my half pretty much just wanted to get that out there. This is extremely unscripted, and I'm not really good at doing unscripted things. I've been talking for half an hour. If I have any advice for you guys, in anticipation for Shadows of Valentia, give the original Gaiden a watch. You know, I did a let's play on my channel. It's like 25 episodes. You can see what I think of Gaiden. Some parts of Gaiden were just rage inducing, you know, it's just a very raw and unpolished game for what it was. But if you want to play Gaiden yourself, go ahead, get a feel for it, get sort of an understanding on what Gaiden's all about. If you want to prep yourself, you'll very quickly, you won't really very quickly understand, but you'll get to know what Gaiden is and how Gaiden works by playing the original game, finding a translation, or going on the emulation services that Nintendo has, that thing. I'm gonna head out now, guys. Happy playing, and thanks for listening. Catch you guys next time.